Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching, however you're watching. This is Quantum of History. I'm your host, Donnie Walsh, and welcome in. Today is going to be an episode about the man with the golden gun and the energy crisis of 1973, Yom Kippur War, the Six-Day War, and how it relates to the man with the golden gun. Now, if you've ever seen the movie The Man with the Golden Gun, the premise of it is to get this Solex, right? This Scaramanga, who's the villain, has this never-ending supply of energy that is needed, and they're going to sell to the world. He's going to be a gazillionaire, right? That is straight out of what was happening at the time in 1970s. James Bond movies are always either 5 seconds in the future or 5 seconds in the past. They're very modern, they're very up-to-date, and the topics that they touch upon are usually very up-to-date with what's going on. And there's always a really good, rich, real-life story that goes behind these stories. I think that's why it's such a great series to do this kind of podcast, YouTube for, because, you know, the James Bond is not, and the villains aren't going around to worlds seeking 6 stones or 5 stones or however many stones that Thanos needs. You know, this is grounded in realism. It's grounded in real life things. It's not, you know, you can turn back time and some dude who's supposed to be an ant gets big or small, or I don't even know. Is he supposed to be big or small? Choose one, bro. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know. Again, not a huge Marvel guy. Again, I feel like Marvel is Applebee's. You know, I like the buffalo wings too, but is it the best? Is what I really want? No. And that's what I think. So today what we're going to talk about is the premise for The Man with the Golden Gun, why it actually is important, what it actually reflects that was going on in 1973 at the time. Because these are time capsules. These movies are time capsules for what was actually going on at the time. And this is a great instrument because it plays on the fears that were happening. People really thought there was never going to be any oil. People really thought this was the end of civilization as we know it. All the modern technology, all the industria that we had, they thought was going to be over because there was no more oil. That the oil was gone, the oil tycoons were going to rule the day, and that was going to be it. So this is a really interesting topic. And one of those ones where I originally just wanted to talk about the energy crisis. And as I researched more and I got into what is Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur War, the Six-Day War, all the way back to 1948, with the Israel-Palestine, because it's always in the news no matter what. The Gaza Strip is always in the news. It was a really interesting topic. So without further ado, let's just go ahead, get right into the meat of it. This is the energy crisis of 1973, the Yom Kippur War, and the Six-Day War. The energy crisis and the man with the golden gun, the main point is that they need to get this Solex. Now, this Solex is supposed to fix the world's energy crisis. And at the time of the movie, America was going through an energy crisis of its own. Gas pump lines were hours long, fuel prices were spiking, and there was a panic that there was no end in sight. And by the 1970s, America was fully mobile. GM had bought up many urban train tracks and ripped them out of the ground, really for the sole purpose to make people buy vehicles. West Coast cities were being built in a sprawling manner, meaning out, not up. Now, East Coast cities that predate the automobile were always built upwards, rather than outwards like Los Angeles or Las Vegas. This was because people walked or took public transit everywhere. Now, this all changed when the automotive industry made it affordable for everyone to own their own vehicle. This meant that there was no longer a need to build towering housing, and the American dream of a single-family home with a car in the yard and a lawn of your own was available to everyone. But in order for this to work, America needed fossil fuels to power this new paradigm. In 1973, the reality of how crippling the reliance on fossil fuels could be came to fruition. In 1948, to understand this, you have to go all the way back to 1948. So in 1948, Britain gave up part of Palestine in order for displaced Jews to have a place to worship of their own. The land that then turned into the state of Israel. The Holy Land is revered by both Jews and Muslims. Palestine has never honored this new state of Israel, and neither did many of the other Arab nations. The fighting for this Holy Land continued, and it still does today. While Israel and the Arab world fight over rights to this land, America encouraged an ever-growing oil consumption. It was believed at the time that the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC as it became known, needed the revenue procured from American consumption. American policymakers thought that no matter what the political climate was, that OPEC would continue to sell to the United States. What America didn't realize by 1973 was that America needed oil far more than oil needed America. And in early October 1973, the Yom Kippur War began. The Yom Kippur War was a part of an ongoing fight for territory between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and others. Now, the Israelis had gained territory in 1967 during the Six-Day War. The Six-Day War was a vital victory for Israel in the region, and a point of conflict still today. The war happened on June 5th through June 10th, 1967. Israel, feeling mobilization of Jordanian, Egyptian, and Syrian forces, launched a preemptive strike against Arab forces. Tensions in the area rose to a boil. Numerous strikes, planes getting shot down, and basically strikes between Israel and Arab forces came to fruition. Now, prior to this, Egypt and Jordan tried to maintain a distance from the conflict, choosing rather to support quietly rather than overt support. They relied on the United Nations to try and keep the order in the area. And as tensions mounted, this no longer was possible. And support for Syria and Palestinians was demanded by Egypt and Jordanian and many of the other Arab nations. In response, King Hussein of Jordan and President Gamal Nasser of Egypt agreed to send forces to fight Israel. President Nasser closed off shipping to Israel, creating a quasi-blockade, and it was apparent that strikes were imminent. So on June 5th, 1967, Israel launched an air assault on Egypt's Air Force, destroying 90% of their air force. Israel also simultaneously launched an air assault against Syrian Air Force as well. This crippled the plan of aerial coverage for the Arab troops on the ground in the Gaza Strip. In just a couple of days, Israel had claimed the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Old City of Jerusalem, and Golan Heights. A ceasefire was offered by the United Nations, which Israel and Jordan quickly agreed to. Egypt the next day followed suit, and the last holdout was Syria, which reluctantly, on June 10, 1967, also agreed to the ceasefire. All told, the Arab alliance lost nearly 20,000 troops, compared to just 700 lost from Israel. While attacks continued on smaller scale, it remained relatively stable until 1973, when the Yom Kippur War broke out. Yom Kippur is a Jewish holiday that is known as the Day of Atonement. It is on Yom Kippur that God is supposed to decide the fate of people. In response to this, Jews are encouraged to atone for their mistakes, their transgressions. They have a 25-hour fast, and that day is spent on intensive prayer and religious ceremonies. Jews do not work. They do not partake in any activities. That day is solely for reflection and atonement and prayer. They do so in hopes of currying favor with God so that their fate may be one of positivity and fruitfulness. It is said that the first Yom Kippur occurred at Mount Sinai, where God gave Moses the first 10 commandments. And it was because of this knowledge that Israelis were going to be, praying, that would be deep in prayer and unsuspecting, that Egypt and Syrian forces launched a strike on Israel on October 6th, 1973, which was Yom Kippur. Syrian and Egyptian forces were able to go deep inside the Sinai Peninsula to the Golan Heights. After regaining their footing, Israel pushed Syrian and Egyptian forces back out of the Golan Heights. On October 25th, 1973, a ceasefire was agreed upon, and the Yom Kippur War was over. Now, while the missiles were no longer firing, the political war was far from over. The attack and the repercussions of the Yom Kippur set up forth a chain of reactions that tempered the world. The Soviet Union began sending weapons and supplies to Egypt and Syria, while America sent supplies to Israel. As a backlash for America's support for Israel, an oil embargo was placed on America and the Netherlands. This caused a massive spike in oil prices. The Yom Kippur ended by the end of October 1973, but the embargo continued. The embargo continued and lasted for 3 months, and at that time, oil prices went from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel. Gas lines were flooded with people trying to get gas. People's home energy was greatly affected. The government urged people to not hang Christmas lights to save energy. The American automotive industry had followed the trend of making bigger and bigger cars. These growing cars also led to less and less fuel consumption, less and less efficient as a result. After the oil crisis, the Japanese industry for the first time surpassed the American automotive industry. The Japanese automotive industry relied on smaller, more efficient countries. Countries in Europe were told to drive less, no boating, and they were even told to heat just one room in their house to conserve energy. The embargo was lifted in March 1974, but changes were made. Domestic oil production became a priority, along with alternative means of energy. We've got nuclear power plants, the building of wind, solar energy are explored, and the automotive industry started making smaller and more compact cars. Energy efficiency and environmentalism became priorities. And it was a wake-up call to lawmakers about how the dependence on foreign oil was a major weakness that needed to be remedied. So as there's always going to be a need for reliance on energy. The industrial world is always going to need energy. You're seeing it now with alliances that happen between, how are they getting it? Iran, China, and Russia are in one alliance trying to get energy. These alliances are not for idealism or anything like that. It's about energy. And then you've got, the Western world, UK, United States, Canada, all the rest of the world having another alliance that goes in. And it's because we all need the same thing. We all need energy. And eventually there won't be fossil fuels one day. I don't know if it's going to be anytime soon, but probably in my lifetime. I mean, look at even the automotive industry. By 2025 and 2030, for the rest of them, you're not going to see any more fossil fuel vehicles being put out on American highways anymore. It's all going to be electric. That energy still has to come from someplace else, which is going to be electric, either wind energy or nuclear energy or things like that. And I mean, you stop the Keystone Pipeline and things like that, which is a big project, which keeps us oil independent, energy independent, which is important. But eventually, that pipeline is going to get done. Once a new administration comes, that pipeline will get done. And we probably have to go for another 30, 40, 50 years, on the trajectory it seems. We probably don't have much longer than that to really need a massive amount of fossil fuels. But we still need to be independent. And at this time, we looked at 1973, what happened when we lost our energy independence. And that was a big selling point for these elections, is when you stop a Keystone Pipeline that keeps us energy independent, you now have to get that from somewhere else. And where does the other point go? It has to be imported. How do you import it? You put it on big oil tankers, and it has to be brought across the Atlantic, which is, again, no easy task to bring all these barrels of oil across the Atlantic Ocean or across the Pacific Ocean. I mean, what are you saving? I don't know. But that's, I guess, you learn from the past, and it's just so important to be energy independent, because the demand is not going to change. If you change the supply, the demand is still there. You haven't changed the demand. So if you haven't changed the demand, changing the supply doesn't do anything other than hurt yourself. So as long as the demand's there, we have to look at the best way to do it until we have different ways, which are happening. Companies are doing it. And again, these automotive industries and all this stuff are moving to electric. And I'm sure for a multitude of reasons, not just because of beneficent, environmentalist reasons. So that was it. That was the energy crisis of 1973. That's how it relates to The Man with the Golden Gun, a James Bond film, which is my guilty pleasure. I shouldn't like the movie. I shouldn't watch it. I should not have seen it as many times as I have. But for some reason, there's something about it. I just like the movie, and I know I shouldn't. But I like it, so it is what it is. This has been Donnie Waldron. This has been Man with the Golden Gun, Energy Crisis, Yom Kippur War, 6-Day War. Thank you guys so much. And if you haven't, like, comment, subscribe. I'll tell you what. Little man, what should they be doing?
Like what you saw, then hit that subscribe button. Comment down below and leave a like and hit that subscribe